As women, we can be absolutely brutal with ourselves. One off day, one bad night's sleep, one missed workout, and suddenly the whole thing feels like a catastrophic personal failure. But here's the thing, you didn't fail, and it's not some character flaw either. We were evaluated on our bodies and behavior from a very young age. Of course, we internalize the idea that we're always falling short. Add in a fitness and weight loss industry that runs almost entirely on messaging about fast results and fixing flaws, research that has historically focused mostly on men, and a social media ecosystem practically engineered for comparison. And self-criticism starts to feel like a personality trait. It really doesn't have to be, because the actual secret is patience, consistency, and treating yourself with a little kindness. Just that. And before we dive in, I want to say this clearly. Your weight loss journey will not be linear. You will have weeks where nothing seems to move and weeks where everything shifts at once. That is normal physiology, not a sign you're doing it wrong. Now, there is a lot of overlap between men and women when it comes to fat loss. The core formula doesn't change. Resistance training, regular movement, a moderate calorie deficit, good sleep, and stress management. What does change is how your body responds to that formula and when. On average, women have higher estrogen levels, which promote subcutaneous fat storage. That's fat stored under the skin, particularly in the hips, thighs, and glutes. This is an evolutionary adaptation tied to reproductive health and hormonal regulation. It's not a design flaw, it's a design feature. A slightly inconvenient one, maybe, but still. Men, on average, have higher testosterone levels, which support greater muscle mass, leaner body composition, and a higher resting metabolic rate. Different design priorities. Comparing your progress to a man's or trying to follow strategies built around male physiology is honestly where a lot of frustration begins. And it goes deeper than that because your body doesn't operate the same way at 15, 25, 45, or during pregnancy. Hormones shift, recovery changes, stress tolerance changes. So your strategy has to evolve too. The good news is your body isn't random. It follows patterns, daily rhythms, monthly cycles, life stages. Understanding those patterns isn't overcomplicating things. It's the opposite. It's smart. There is also overlap in the fat loss myths marketed to both men and women. 1. Spot reduction is not real. No pill, wrap, or overpriced cream can target fat loss in a specific area. This is one of the most profitable lies in the wellness industry, and the people selling you targeted belly fat solutions absolutely know it. Here's why. When your body draws on stored fat for energy, it does so systemically, pulling from fat stores throughout the body based on a combination of genetics, hormones, and overall energy balance. You cannot choose where fat comes from, which is why doing 500 crunches a night is not a fat loss strategy. You might build genuinely impressive abs. They'll just be patiently waiting under there, biding their time until your overall body fat comes down enough to reveal them. 2. Toning is not a physiological mode your body has. Muscle either grows or it atrophies. What most people mean when they say, "I want to look toned," is visible muscle with low enough body fat that definition shows. That's body recomposition, and it requires building muscle while simultaneously reducing fat. The aesthetic you're after is the natural result of doing that well. Doing both at once is possible, but it's slow. It tends to work best for beginners or people returning after a significant break. For most people, you'll make faster progress prioritizing one goal at a time, then shifting. With the myths out of the way, let's move on to life stages. During puberty, typically beginning between ages 8 and 13 in girls, with full physical maturation often continuing into the mid to late teens, fat accumulation is not a problem to solve. It is the biological design that fat gain supports brain function, hormonal development, bone density, and long-term health. Attempting to diet during this phase disrupts growth, hormones, and, perhaps most lastingly, your long-term relationship with food. This is also, unfortunately, when most of us first learned to criticize our bodies. So if you're carrying some weight from that era emotionally, you are not alone, and it is genuinely worth unpacking. The focus at this stage should be nourishment, movement for joy, and building confidence, not restriction. As your body grows and changes, one of the most important milestones you'll experience is the beginning of your menstrual cycle. Your menstrual cycle begins at puberty and ends at menopause. That's decades of monthly fluctuation, so understanding it is genuinely one of the most useful things you can do. The cycle is regulated by a feedback system, specifically the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and your ovaries. Hormones signal constantly back and forth, rising and falling across roughly 4 phases, each of which affects your energy, strength, hunger, mood, recovery, and even fluid balance in recognizable patterned ways. When you understand those patterns, everything changes. Understanding this process helps you feel more in tune with your body, rather than confused by it. Here's how each phase actually plays out. During menstruation, estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest. Temporary scale increases due to water retention are common. This is often the exact moment women think it's not working and abandon what they were doing. But here's the thing, fat loss hasn't stopped. The signal is just being temporarily masked by water retention and inflammation. The follicular phase overlaps with menstruation and extends past it. Estrogen begins rising while progesterone stays low. Insulin sensitivity tends to improve, which means more stable energy. Recovery is generally faster, and motivation tends to peak. By the late follicular phase, many women report feeling mentally sharper, stronger in the gym, and more motivated. During ovulation, estrogen peaks, and energy and strength are typically at their highest. A brief surge in luteinizing hormone triggers the release of an egg. Enjoy this phase, it tends to be the one that feels the most effortless. In the luteal phase, progesterone rises as estrogen fluctuates and then gradually declines. And here's where things get more interesting. Research does suggest a slight increase in resting metabolic rate during the luteal phase. Estimates vary, but roughly 100 to 300 extra calories burned per day is a commonly cited range, though individual variation is significant. The catch? Appetite goes up proportionally, so this isn't a free pass to eat more freely. The two effects largely cancel each other out. Insulin sensitivity also tends to decrease slightly during this phase, meaning your body handles carbohydrates a little less efficiently than earlier in the cycle. Cravings are common, particularly for quick energy foods. Sleep may feel lighter, workouts can feel harder at the same intensity. Fluid retention is common and can temporarily affect scale readings, but don't panic, that fluid typically clears quickly when menstruation begins. When you know what's physiologically normal, you stop second-guessing yourself. You replace self-criticism with strategy. You adjust instead of quitting. And it's the adjusting and staying consistent that actually drives fat loss over time. Hormonally speaking, your 20s and 30s are generally the most stable phases of your adult life. Your hormones are relatively predictable, your metabolism is typically at its most cooperative, and your capacity to build muscle is at its peak. But life in your 20s is chaotic. You're juggling work, relationships, big decisions, probably inadequate sleep, and stress levels that nobody warned you about. Suddenly, the simple formula becomes genuinely hard to execute, and this is often the phase where women start being particularly hard on themselves. You push harder, restrict more, try to do everything perfectly, and end up in that exhausting cycle of restriction, burnout, and starting over. So instead of going all in and flaming out, here's what actually matters. 1. Build muscle now. This means progressive overload, progressively increasing the challenge over time, not just going through the motions. The muscle you build in your 20s and 30s will pay dividends for decades, particularly as you approach menopause. 2. Get your protein intake right. Most women chronically undereat protein without realizing it. Current evidence-based guidance suggests that active women benefit from around 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So if you weigh 65 kilograms, that's roughly 100 grams daily. Protein preserves the muscle you're working to build, keeps you fuller for longer, and supports recovery. It is the least glamorous nutrition advice and also, genuinely, the most impactful. 3. Avoid the extreme dieting cycle. Repeated cycles of severe restriction and overeating can affect your relationship with food, your hormonal environment, and your muscle mass over time. A moderate, sustainable calorie deficit beats a dramatic one almost every time. 4. Treat recovery like it's training. Sleep deprivation increases hunger hormones, reduces insulin sensitivity, and undermines muscle building. These are the best investments you can make in your long-term health and metabolism. Now, a note about pregnancy. If you're pregnant, fat loss is not the goal. Your body is designed to gain weight during pregnancy from the baby, placenta, amniotic fluid, increased blood volume, and additional tissue. The amount of weight gained varies considerably and should be guided by your healthcare provider. Attempting to restrict calories during pregnancy can be harmful to both you and your baby. Instead, focus on nourishing your body adequately, staying active in a safe and appropriate way, following medical guidance, and managing stress and sleep as best you can. These habits also support a healthier postpartum recovery. If you're in your late 30s or 40s and feel like your body has started behaving differently, despite doing everything right, you are not imagining it. Menopause isn't a single event. It's a process with 3 distinct stages: perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. Each affects your body differently, especially when it comes to weight, metabolism, and fat distribution. Let's start with perimenopause because this is the stage most women don't realize they're in. During perimenopause, your ovaries are still functioning, but they're becoming unpredictable. Estrogen doesn't simply decline, it fluctuates, sometimes quite wildly. Meanwhile, progesterone drops more steadily. This hormonal turbulence can begin in your late 30s or early 40s and last anywhere from 4 to 12 years. And this is often when the first significant body composition changes appear, including fat accumulation, particularly around the midsection. But fat distribution isn't the only thing changing. Starting in your 30s, muscle mass begins to gradually decline through a process called sarcopenia. It accelerates after 50, but it begins earlier. This is exactly why building muscle in your 20s and 30s is so valuable. You're not just building for now, you're building a buffer. Sleep quality, libido, and mood may also change during this phase. Bone density begins declining more noticeably as estrogen falls. Perimenopause is genuinely whole-body instability, hormonal, metabolic, and structural happening simultaneously. During perimenopause, the core strategy doesn't change, but the execution needs to be smarter. Prioritize strength training even more than before. Be cautious with aggressive calorie restriction, as very low-calorie intakes can accelerate muscle loss and are harder to sustain when appetite signals are disrupted. Protect your sleep and manage stress deliberately because your body's stress response becomes more sensitized during this phase. This is not the time to go harder, it's the time to go smarter. Menopause itself is clinically defined as 12 consecutive months without a period. It marks the point at which the ovaries have largely ceased releasing eggs and estrogen levels have settled at a consistently low baseline. The average age in the US and the UK is 51, though there's significant variation. Once you've been period-free for 12 months, you've crossed into post-menopause, which is the rest of your life going forward. And here's the important distinction from perimenopause. Your hormones are no longer fluctuating unpredictably. They've settled at a lower baseline. That sounds almost peaceful, and in some ways it is. No more tracking where you are in your cycle, and no more surprise chaos. But the lower hormonal environment does have real consequences. Metabolism tends to slow, partly due to lower muscle mass and partly due to hormonal changes. Muscle continues to decline if not actively addressed. Weight changes, particularly around the midsection, can feel more stubborn, not because your body is failing you, but because it's operating under a fundamentally different set of conditions. Resistance training and protein remain essential, but the emphasis shifts. You're not chasing an aesthetic. You're building a body that functions well, moves well, and carries you through the next 30 or 40 years. Research increasingly highlights the role of NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, at this stage. That's essentially just moving more throughout your day, stretching, playing with children, pottering around. When formal exercise becomes harder to sustain, NEAT becomes one of your most powerful metabolic tools, and it adds up more than most people realize. The bottom line is this: weight management for women doesn't come from being perfect. Progress won't be linear, and it won't always be visible right away. But that doesn't mean it isn't happening. The real goal isn't to fight your body, it's to work with it, fuel it consistently, train it intelligently, respect its need for recovery. Because the real secret isn't extremes or quick fixes, it's patience, consistency, and understanding your body at every stage of life. And it's learning to treat yourself with a little more kindness along the way.